Well, I can say that the Negotiate Like the Pros program is an evolving program because I have designed a track to run on to cover the basic strategy, the basic tactics, some of the common difficulties that come up with people, some of the information on personality styles. But of course, it has to be related to everyday life for it to be relevant as far as I'm concerned. So if you heard the Negotiate Like the Pros seminar today, it would be different than it was a year ago and different than it will be a year from now, because things in the world are different. Almost every scenario in politics, in law, in sports, in medicine, in business can be related to the concepts that we're talking about in the Negotiate Like the Pros program. So the most important thing I like to do is keep the program fresh by talking about what's going on the day that the person walks into the seminar or what's been going on the month before. That makes a big difference because when you see it in everyday life, you really sort of you're able to digest it. Well, other than particular professions, what there are specialty areas. And if a person has a specialty area in negotiation, you have to be very wary about negotiating with them. Lawyers obviously negotiate quite a bit. So if you're trying to negotiate civilian on a lawyer, you're probably not going to come out too well. People who sell timeshares are really good at what they do. People who sell life insurance are really good at what they do. People who sell automobiles are really good at what they do. And so when you have somebody who's a professional negotiator in a particular area of business or transaction or the professions, my recommendation is get somebody to represent you rather than try and negotiate on your own behalf. Because one of the funny things is, and I learned this from my profession, in the legal profession, when I negotiate on behalf of a client, I can be pretty aggressive, but whatever result comes out, I don't have to do the jail time. My client does the jail time. When my client is negotiating on his own behalf, he doesn't do nearly as well as I can do for him because, as I mentioned previously, I'm not attached to the outcome. I'm committed to the outcome, but I'm not attached to it. When it's your house, your car, your business, your freedom when it comes to a criminal case, and you're negotiating on your own behalf, a lot of times it's difficult to be rational, and we tend to give up more than we would otherwise. We tend to take something less than we could have gotten otherwise. And so it's important whenever you're dealing with someone who has a specialty area, be very careful, be very wary, and maybe get someone to represent you who has the same kind of knowledge background as the person with whom you're dealing. You know, there's all kinds of historical negotiation stories. Now, I have to say my friend Roger Dawson, who's a very well-known negotiation speaker, is much more in tune with historical negotiation than I am. But Potsdam with Churchill and Stalin and Truman is a classic example. The Bay of Pigs circumstance and the negotiations between Kennedy and the State Department and Khrushchev and Russian representatives is a classic historical negotiation. The interesting negotiation that takes place sometimes in business and industry are all examples of sort of classic negotiation scenarios. But for me, the more interesting negotiation is the everyday negotiation in which people get involved, because that's where we live. You can look in the history books, and almost every history book you can look at any famous treaty that was agreed upon between the Indians and the government, or between our government and another government, or between us and Japan, or any treaty. The treaty in Paris in the 1917. And you'll always see the techniques we're talking about. You'll always see something of the strategy we're talking about. So rather than use a lot of historical examples, as my friend Roger does, I like to use the concepts and then relate them to what's taking place in contemporary history. But I have to say, you can always see and dissect any historical example of a problem or a resolution resolved in terms of the concepts we're talking about in this program. Well, it's a combination of skill development and experience. And so it's the combination of the two. If you've got 25 years of business experience and you've never been exposed objectively to the strategy and tactics of the Negotiate Like the Pros program or any other negotiation strategy and tactics set of concepts, probably in a year or less, you could go out and practice the techniques and then fold them into the experience you already have and really improve your skill as a negotiator. If you are a person who's learned by classroom and you've practiced a little bit, but you've really never been out in the real world and settled a case or bought a car or bought or sold a home, it'll take you a little bit longer. So it's the combination of experience and practical skill that you've developed that gets you where you need to go. But I would encourage every young high school student to take a negotiation course, because you know the high school students are going to eventually be involved in negotiation, and people learn a little more readily in their younger days. I would also say anybody who's involved in sales and marketing should take every negotiation course and read every negotiation book they can get a hold of, because there's all kinds of great sales theories, but the nuts and bolts of any sales theory will be a strategy and tactics that will come back to the techniques we talk about when we talk about basic negotiation skills. Usually, if you have a problem in negotiation, it's a skills problem. It can be a strategy or a mindset or an approach problem, but most of the time it's a skills problem. Usually what happens is we encounter someone on the other side who has a limitation in their skills, and so they talk in terms of take it or leave it, or they are really belligerent and they think that's the way to get a problem solved. And if you're not used to dealing with take it or leave it, or if you're not used to dealing with belligerent behavior, it can throw you off. But honestly, when someone says take it or leave it, what are they saying? You know, I don't have much in the way of skills, and so I've told you what I want to get out of this transaction, and I'm hoping it works out. But gee, I don't know where to go after that. Whenever I hear someone say take it or leave it, I always ask them, why do you say that? And then just sort of act like Columbo, a little bit dumb, and scratch your head a little bit. And a lot of times they'll tell you what's really behind the take it or leave it. When somebody gets belligerent, what that tells me is that's all they got. And so if you run into a person, and this is very common, that's mean or nasty or curt, all you have to do is get past that. Because once they get past that, they don't have much left. If they had really good negotiation skills, they obviously wouldn't be behaving in that fashion. So a lot of times the best thing you can do when somebody's getting nasty is just be quiet, be silent, and let them go. Because after they've used up all of their energy being belligerent, they're pretty much finished. Well, the last thing I would say is this, and this is just my own philosophy, but I believe negotiation is fun. You know, the give and take of life is really a game. And if you treat it like a game and you don't take it too seriously, if you're committed to getting outcomes but you're not attached to outcomes, you can have a lot of fun. You can play with the techniques that we use in negotiation. You can play with the techniques we learn when we determine the different personality styles and how to relate to those different personality styles. And you can remember that there's no deal that you have to have. If you can take that attitude, if you can take an attitude of calm demeanor, even in a very serious negotiation, have an affable personality, pay attention to the people on the other side of the table, and use your techniques in a way to put together a transaction that makes sense for all parties involved, you can have a good time in the give and take of life that is really the substance of life. And negotiating like the pros to me is probably one of the most enjoyable things I do, and it's why I've spent 25 years studying and practicing and working on the techniques of negotiation as I have.